This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and I'm here with a returning guest, Alec Nowrasteh, who is the Vice President of Economic and Social Policy at the Cato Institute. And the Cato Institute, for those who do not know, is a libertarian think tank, I would say. Would you say that? Okay, yeah. I just want to tell people because sometimes people are sometimes people are at like the socially conservative Midwestern Institute. I think they know what that is, but Cato's a little bit harder just from Cato the Elder, Cato the Younger, obviously ancient Greek, but also the Cato letters from Cato, I think, is actually what it's actually named after.
That's right. The Cato's letters from the 18th century UK, great letters in favor of religious freedom of expression, anyway, named after Cato the Younger. But we do not directly get it from them, the Romans.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, a lot has happened. I think it's been almost 3 years since we talked on the immigration field, and that's what we want to talk to. And you had a book about immigration, actually. What was the book's title again? I'm sorry,
It was, it's fine. Our Wretched Refuse, The Political Economy of Immigration and Institutions. It came out in 2020 and was published by Cambridge University Press. And I co-authored that with Benjamin Powell.
Okay, yeah, 2020. So it was a while ago. And so, a lot has, we have, Trump was reelected. And then we had, or not reelected, we elected again. I don't know how you want to say that because we haven't had this situation in a while where we had another president in the middle. And the Biden administration happened, and that administration was defined by a lot of volatility. And I think when I was talking to you, it was kind of in the middle of the administration, maybe early mid, and he was basically just not paying attention to immigration. So a lot of stuff was going on, but it was undirected. And then near the end, he was like, oh, well, maybe I should pay attention to immigration because people care about immigration. And they went in a different direction, but, too late in terms of what the American public thought, where in terms of the control of the border, which, maybe you thought it was I don't know, you have some opinions on that. But I actually want to talk right now about the deportation and the current policies. So the first term, my impression of Trump is a lot of focus at the border. But, kind of took the standard American, position for decades that you're kind of lax on the interior enforcement. Now they're trying to do, they're trying to do enforcement in the interior. Some of it has resulted in a lot of bad press in terms of, there's some people where the situation is weird, like they're removed, with their family around them, and other situations it looks like, there's false. Basically, you're not going to get 100% on this sort of stuff. And there are people who are green card holders or even citizens who've been, caught up in this. And that's causing a lot of bad press, which people would think. On the other hand, so I talked to Jason Richwhine about this, who has different opinions on these sorts of things. I think what is partly trying to do is give a message to people who might come here or people who are in the shadows. That you're not, going to be safe anywhere. Because the standard protocol for a lot of these people over the last couple of decades, especially during the Biden administration, but not exclusively, is once you make it into this country, beyond the border, you're kind of going to be left alone. And I think what the Trump administration was trying to send a signal is you're not necessarily going to be left alone. Now, the reality is, probably on the order of 10% of America, well, maybe like 5%, right? Are undocumented, illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call them, something like that. And we're not going to have ICE deport all of those physically. But what the Trump administration is trying to do is get many of them to self-deport as possible. And this kind of, It's a little bit of reign of terror. They're obviously actually quite excited about some of the media coverage, ironically, in
Yeah, I
terms of
mean,
like they're yeah.
yeah, and most law enforcement is, a deterrent effect, to put a nice spin on it, to try to get people to comply with rules indirectly so that they change their own behavior, right? So I guess this will be the first time in my history I'll defend the deportation regime against the reign of terror argument. But it's just, trying to get people to leave in that. But I think you're broadly correct that the U.S. Presidents have not done interior enforcement very well in the United States historically. The big exception was actually Barack Obama's first term, where he set deportation records from the interior of the United States. And I'm actually a skeptic. I don't think this year President Trump is going to reach like President Obama first term numbers in terms of deportations, even in his first year, maybe in his second year or third year. But it's really, really hard to do interior deportations, especially when you're not getting a lot of cooperation from local and state law enforcement like President Obama did. So I think that there's a lot of like bluster, a lot of scary images, a lot of visuals that are, disturbing and that are really, like you said, like affecting the media landscape. But in terms of the actual like effectiveness of a lot of these measures, I think they're muted. And if we see an effect, it will be in convincing people to voluntarily leave the United States.
Well, I mean, so I guess look, you're not a lawyer, but I mean, you're in and around the space.
Thank
I'm
God.
actually
Yeah.
I'm actually curious. Um, okay, I know people who are, they're from like real examples, Australia, Sweden, first world places, not shithole countries, they're not coming to the United States because they feel like they might get hassled. They probably won't. What is the legal, I mean, basis or consequence for when they basically, I'll call them false positives, okay? Because
Yeah.
they're not. I mean, look, I mean, I don't think Trump wants to terrorize ethnic Swedes coming on a tourist trip to the United States, but that sort of stuff is happening. My own hypothesis for why some of it is happening is like, who wants to be an ICE person, who wants to work for ICE, who wants to go into border patrol? I mean, you have a certain type of personality, which is fine. You're going into law enforcement. You're looking for, people trying to, get into your country. And so they know during the Biden administration, they best be on their best behavior because they got no backup if, the hammer comes down when it comes to the media or, in their supervisor. Whereas under the Trump administration, I feel like they know that they will get the benefit of the doubt. But what are the legal ramifications? I mean, like, what if, as a citizen, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to say this without sounding racist, but I don't think I look super Latino. Like, it seems like the people who are citizens who have gotten targeted are Latino Americans with an accent, and they look kind of like they could be undocumented. But, some of them have been citizens that have been detained and not nicely, What are are they going to get sued a lot? Because I just wonder about that.
So if you're like a Swede coming over and you just are coming on your ESTA, your visa waiver program, and they deny you coming here or they detain you, there's no legal ramifications for that. You can't sue or anything like that. It's a consular black box. They can deny you for any reason, and that's it. So it's like a legal black hole. If you are a citizen or you have another visa and they detain you, then there can be legal consequences, especially if you're a citizen and they detain you and they do something bad to you. You can sue. The courts will probably take a very lenient view of those things. They usually do historically. Usually, like Border Patrol and Customs are exempt from a lot of the Constitution, frankly, in terms of these rules, because at the border there are fewer rules for obvious reasons, and many of those reasons make sense. But the government has a lot more power over you as an American citizen, and a lot more power over even like a lawful permanent resident than it would inside of the United States. So you can sue. There have been cases about this even before the Trump administration. There were cases, we wrote a report about this from based on data from Tarrant County, Texas, about people who are illegal immigrants detained there, but then some of them turn out to be American citizens. And a lot of them have problems. Some of them are like schizophrenic. And so they can't really advocate for themselves, right? So they might say, like, in one sentence, I'm Napoleon and I'm going to kill you. And then the next sentence, I was born in the United States. And so you kind of understand why a ICE agent or a government prosecutor might not take them seriously when they say they're an American citizen, and then they get deported, and then it turns out they were born in the United States. And so there are legal ramifications for that. They do sue. The government usually does settle in those cases. But you do have fewer rights at the border. We all do at the border. But you have basically zero if you are a non-citizen coming here on a temporary visa.
Okay, and also in terms of Border Patrol, and what counts as the border, a lot of the United States is actually, I believe Austin is right outside of it, but if you're near, so basically, if you're in San Antonio, I think, or something, I mean, basically the coastal United States, like all the big megalopolises on the coast, count as being on the border. So most of the American population, I think the majority of the American population is actually subject to Border Patrol. In Austin, I'm not. And in Chicago, I think you're not, but if you're in New York City, if you're in Boston, if you're in LA, obviously San Diego, but I think San Antonio as well, you are within that zone, right?
Yeah, it's a 100-mile border zone where there are fewer constitutional protections when it comes to interactions with Customs and Border Protection and Border Patrol. So that means they can do things like set up interior checkpoints to a degree that would not be allowed by other normal American law enforcement in their operations. It also means, that they can start a lot of investigations and approach people based on how they look, based on how they sound. They can do this type of stuff from rules from back in the day. So they do have a lot of legal power. I think the biggest shock for a lot of people in seeing what's going on in American cities with immigration enforcement is that, like, this is all legal. This has been on the books for a very long time. It's just that there has either been reluctance by American presidents to do these types of things, or when they do them, they're like Democrats and they're popular, and the media doesn't cover when Democrats do as many bad things against, as many sort of like intrusive law enforcement programs.
And I'm looking at the map actually. Just to correct myself, so Chicago is actually within that because Lake Michigan. So if you look,
that's a little.
yeah.
That's a little actually like in dispute, that map. That's not like an actual government map that's put together, I think, if I believe correctly, from the ACLU. But I believe that basically all of Lake Michigan is American territorial waters. So there's some dispute over that because it's 100 miles from the actual border, and international borders and most state borders are counted from the middle of the body of water.
Okay. Well, I mean, at least in Austin, I'm just outside of that zone. I did grow up in Eastern Oregon, so I actually have spent a substantial proportion of my life outside of that zone. Although when I lived on the coastal U.S., I was within it. So basically, I mean, the coastal U.S., I mean, the Pacific and the Atlantic, like that, those are within it, right?
Yes, and the Gulf of Mexico too. Like, so that's all in there.
Yeah, that's like so weird. Like it's like, I'm just like now looking at, like, if you're like a libertarian, like anti-government freak though, like you definitely, and I don't say that in a negative way, you definitely want to live in Kansas or something like that. One, there's not that many people, but two, you're away from this border zone. I have so I don't have too many stories. I have one story about Border Patrol. I'll say, like, really funny. I was traveling cross country with my ex at the time, and just paint a picture, like, blonde woman, and like the Mexican American Border Patrol looked at the car. They started talking to me really loudly in Spanish, and I don't know Spanish, but she knows Spanish, so she started talking to them, explaining I'm not like. And they just looked really confused. I was just like, the stuff that they must encounter.
So I actually have one. So I lived in the UK for a year for graduate school. So I didn't have an American phone or an address or anything. So when I moved back to the United States, like Customs and Border Protection, office of over there coming in, they asked me to fill out a form. They're like, what's the address you're staying at? And I'm like, I don't know the address. Like, it's my girlfriend's address. I know how to get there. And they're like, okay, well, call her on your phone. I'm like, I don't have a phone. I'm moving back to the United States. I gave her my phone. This is like 2011, right? And so they're like, okay, well, you have to call her on the office phone, and she's at work, and she's a studious person, so productive, and so she didn't answer her phone. And so they're like, well, we can't let you in. And I said, I'm an American citizen. I can sleep on the streets if I want to. And they didn't like that answer. So they put me in like another holding room. And the supervisor came in and said, like, listen, can you just like put down like an address, like whatever, even if it's not the one you're staying at on this form so we can let you go. And I said, but then what's the point of this form? And the supervisor said, like, I don't know. Which was a great, like, honest answer. And so I just like made up something and got out of there. And maybe I'm like admitting to a crime or something. So like, come and get me. But that's how, like, just in my opinion, crazy, because I can literally sleep on the streets. Like maybe I'll get, a ticket in some American cities that are better governed than others by sleeping on the streets. But like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about uh let's talk about the Great Wave. So, I live in Texas, and so, Abbott was sending I mean, I'll just like straight up say, I was not happy about the chaos at the border.
Mhm.
I think, my attitude towards immigration is, I've had different views over the years, but I do think like, and this is like a totally delusional, idealistic attitude because of the way the legislative process works. But America just needs to get a shit together in terms of having a well-ordered system, whatever system it
Yes.
is. And so I was like pretty pissed, getting progressively more pissed during the first couple of Biden years when this was just like, basically people were coming here from all across the world because they knew that like Joe Biden was taking a nap. I think that's literally true, actually. Now we know. And his administration just didn't want to deal with it because whatever, they were paralyzed by the fact that, there's moderate Democrats who want, border to be under control, and then there's, DSA people who are just insane, and just want no laws, period. Okay, so they just decided, okay, we're just not gonna do anything. And all these people are showing up, and it's totally out of control. And then the last like 6 months or whatever, he's like, oh, okay, we got to get Kamala elected, so we're gonna shut down the border, So I was pretty like not very happy about that. Definitely made me feel much more anti-immigration than I was, say like at the beginning of 2020 when I was just like, okay, well, let's see what's going on. We have a shutdown for the pandemic. And yeah, so I think that that's bad. I mean, what do you think about the, because we do have like a huge wave proportionally. Like maybe you can like dispute the numbers, but I have read that this is like, for a year or two, it was like, proportionally one of the biggest waves in the history of this country of immigrants when you include the undocumented illegal proportion, which was out of whack in terms of ratio, like out of balance with the legal. Like there have been periods when we had like massive waves of legal immigration, obviously, or before it was like legal or illegal, it wasn't a big thing. It's like if you didn't have a disease and you were like a white person or something, you could come to the United States, right? Let's like set aside the 19, like before 1900, but like say in the whatever since like 65, there have been periods where there was a lot of legal immigration, but this was like out of control, undocumented, illegal immigration, and people are pissed. I mean, you are a pretty pro-immigration guy. I'll just use the word pro-immigration, whatever you want to say. I think you just have like economic views, whatever. It's your what I'm trying to get at is your views on immigration are part of like a bigger, view of political economy that you have. So like be clear about that. But what do you think about people being pissed about what was going on 2020 to 2022, mostly like 2021 to 2023? Let's put it that way.
So I think it's totally legitimate to be very upset about the chaos at the border. So, I'm a radical libertarian in a lot of ways. I want to massively increase legal immigration to the United States, but I do think it needs to be in an orderly system. I think and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think order is just good in and of itself. But I also think that when things are disorderly, that people turn against even the legal versions of those activities. And there's a lot of research in political psychology that supports this. Like in Australia, you take a look at the boat people landing, which they have occasionally different times in the past. When that happens, support for legal immigration in Australia collapses. And legal immigration in Australia is like a much larger percentage of their population than it is in the US. It's like it's more than double what it is here in the United States. We see it. And I think that is basically what happened in large part during the Biden administration. I call it chaos theory. And that I don't think people turned against immigration because they were upset about, Mexican food in their neighborhoods. I don't think they were really super concerned about assimilation or integration or the economic effects or crime or maybe a bit crime and terrorism, but not that much. But I think they're upset about those because of the symptoms of chaos. And nobody likes chaos. And that is a totally legitimate reason to be upset about it. The difference is, I think the major way that you reduce a lot of that chaos, which Biden tried to do in 2023 and 2024 to some extent, combining it with enforcement, is expanding legal pathways. So we saw a large number of the people coming in the first couple of years of the Biden administration were from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Haiti, who were coming illegally. And then he created in early 2023 this program called the CVNH parole program, which is allowed under statute to let American sponsors, let people, sponsor 30,000 people a month from these countries in total to come in. And you saw the border numbers from people from these countries just plummet because they could come in lawfully on this program to work and live, etc. And but you didn't see an effect on people from other countries coming in because there was still this open border that was pretty poorly enforced, and this massive growing economy where you had the number of job openings in the U.S. during the Biden years at incredible levels never before recorded in American history. Mostly because of the recovery from the pandemic. So I think there's a lot of things that are going on here, but just to simply answer your question, yeah, it's totally legitimate, I think, for people to be very upset about chaos. I favor, for instance, just to do an analogy, drug legalization. I want to legalize all drugs in the United States. But if I lived in a place like Portland, Oregon, and I saw the amount of totally incompetent chaos having to do with their drug decriminalizations and partial legalizations in that state, I would be pretty upset and pretty pissed. Now, I'd want to go and say, I think a lot of the problem is they didn't go far enough in terms of legalization, but they also let this chaos get out of control, and you still have to enforce laws against people defecating in public on the streets, even if they're high.
Yeah. Neither of us are conventional, I think social liberals. I mean, maybe we kind of are, but okay, I don't understand. I don't know the word for it, but there's a version of left-wing liberal where, I mean, for example, I'm, pro-choice or whatever you want to call it, that's liberalish, right? I think you should be allowed to burn the American flag. That's, I'm the old ACLU type of liberalism. I'm actually not very opposed to, I mean, just what I'm talking about the details, right? But whatever, I kind of whatever. I'm pretty open to a lot of that, but there's a form, and I'm from Oregon, so I know what you're talking about. My home state. I go back a lot, and there's a form of liberalism that is just today, social liberalism, which is just chaos, but also it's the type of liberalism where people will start yelling at a police officer arresting a man who's defecating in public because they're just fuck the cops. And it's just look, he just took a dump in front of the BART stop. Okay. That's not being liberal. It's just chaos, and I don't really understand where that comes from personally. I think neither of us are pro not arresting people defecating in public. So I don't know where that comes from. But what I'm going to ask you here is, what were the people in the Biden administration thinking? Because you were still talking to, immigration, still kind of in and around the immigration beat. What were they thinking? Did they know what was happening here? Was no one just wanting to take responsibility?
So I think there are a lot of things going on. One, they liberalized some of the restrictions on asylum right off the bat. And asylum rules, you ask for, you come to a country, you're there at the border, you can ask for asylum under U.S. law. And unless it's obvious that you're lying, they basically have to let you in and give you this court case to adjudicate that. So I think what happened was they liberalized some of these asylum rules that the Trump administration had put into effect that put some limitations on people coming to the border. And then that sort of opened it up, combined with this massive surge in job openings in the United States, huge surge in labor demand, which attracted a lot of people right off the bat. And so they're caught flat-footed by this chaos in the first couple months. And the numbers, by the way, were going up even before Biden took office. Like the December 2020 numbers were the highest in like over 20 years in terms of the number of apprehensions along the border. So I don't think it's like an entirely a Biden thing. I think that if Trump had gotten reelected, there would also have been like a pretty large surge. Maybe not to the same degree. Maybe he would have freaked out more and put like more troops on the border, et cetera. But there are really like these underlying economic factors that combined with, I think, the Biden administration not paying a lot of attention early on and not really caring about it that much. And then you had this real focus on trying to work with like Mexico, and Mexico not paying attention to the United States, not caring because the Biden administration didn't care very much about immigration. And then you had like in the same time, the customs and border protection and arguing along with the Biden administration about what to do, and just like a lot of chaos. Like they just could not get their handle on anything really inside of the Biden administration, get control over very much. And it really took a couple years for them. And this goes actually for the legal immigration system as well. So it took them like 8 months to a year to get the green card problem sorted out that they inherited from the Trump administration. I mean, they burned in the Biden administration a couple 100,000 green cards because you have to issue them in the course of a year, they don't roll over. And so they sort of inherited this backlog of not being able to issue them. And then they sort of got their act together for the last couple months of the fiscal year 2021, but it wasn't enough time to save them. So they basically lost a lot of green cards, which is like in contrast to the whole like open borders Biden myth, right? So like, why would he burn green cards? Like, well, it's incompetent administration dealing with what is arguably the second most complicated portion of American law on multiple different angles, while a huge surge of chaos is going on, partly caused by their policy changes, also partly caused by the underlying economic situation changing. And that's just like, combined with like a president who is obviously cognitively declining on top of that, it's just like a recipe for chaos and confusion. And it really took them a couple of years. Like it was really like in late 2023 when they started to get a handle on a lot of the border situation, the numbers started to go down pretty dramatically in the last sort of year, last 15 months or so of his administration. But it was really like largely too late, I think, to solve a lot of the political problems, which, you noticed and felt. Which I noticed and felt, which like everybody noticed and felt, which is like you just cannot have this type of disorder going on for long periods of time and be in a stable political equilibrium.
Well, also, there are also things like, the Colorado Springs story about the Venezuelan gangs that the media was like, oh, well, this, the Democrats were like, that's a lie. And I mean, look, obviously the right-wing media is going to exaggerate and make it sensational, but, there was a basis in the fact that it does seem like organized criminal elements were taking advantage of the chaos. Like the government was abdicating its responsibility to the public, including immigrants, because those are the people that actually live in those areas. And people were just starting to, and it was total denial, and the media was going along with it. Like, I think you can hear like my exasperation because I think everybody knew what was going on, and they were just saying it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Like they were doing the Shaggy defense when it comes to immigration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the media gets very confused often, understandably. This is my best spin on that, by the way. So, but I think, they take a look at like the overall crime numbers, right? When you take a look at immigration, even illegal immigration, it's a lot lower than native-born Americans. But then they take that and sort of blow it up and be like, well, in this situation, therefore, like this type of stuff couldn't have happened, right? And that's just obviously not true. Like, you can have like, like female, PhDs teaching at universities and, probably the lowest crime cohort group of people in the United States. And you can find instances of people who are murderers in those cases, right? It would be idiotic to respond to that, be like, well, that's a really low crime population. So obviously, like, nobody who's a female PhD teaching at an American university can be a murderer. And I think that's like partly what's going on is like the media is so radically innumerate and incapable of understanding that just because a population is less likely to be criminal than the overall population, that therefore like there's really like none and there's nothing to worry about. And that's like obviously untrue. Like there are obviously a large number of illegal immigrant criminals in the United States. And I think they should all be, they're violent and property offenders, should be arrested and punished and then removed from the United States. And you can say like, yeah, they're less likely than native born Americans, but so what? That doesn't tell you anything about this horrible image of a gang taking over like an apartment building and brutalizing people who often are immigrants themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's pivot a little bit to a different topic: H-1Bs and high skilled immigration. So the traditional not I mean before Trump, and really even into the first Trump administration, high skilled immigration, and this is immigration with people with educational qualifications. They get sponsored in various ways by tech companies or pharmaceutical company, whatever, something like that, university. This was not seen as by the Republicans, by the right, as a big problem, and in fact, um, I heard from I'm not going to say who it is. I hate doing stuff like that, but there's someone in the administration at a non-trivial position who told me in 2016, 2017 that there were a lot of people in the Trump administration that were like, let's just like do a trade where we get like, all these high skilled immigrants, like we'll be like, okay, that's good. And then, but we get rid of all the low skilled, undocumented, we clamp down on things, they were okay with that trade. But in December, there was like an internet social media storm about high skilled immigration, and a lot of MAGAs like, we don't want to be replaced by, people like Richard Spencer. Like, we don't want to be, people like Richard Spencer. He has said this explicitly. I think he's referred to me as like, he doesn't want me and my kids to replace him and his kids, but he's okay with Conchita or whatever her name. He's okay with the Latina maid, but he's not okay with Vivek Ramaswamy. And I get that because like we will replace you. No, I'm just joking. No, that's really true.
Are you lumping me in with the we?
Well, you know what? You get to choose, I guess.
Okay, I'm passing.
Yeah, well, no, that's your that's your liberty. You're like in the Silmarillion, in the lore of Lord of the Rings, the half elven Elrond and Elros, they got to choose whether what kindred they were with. You know what I'm saying? And so people don't know your ethnic background. I mean, you're half Persian and half like just like old stock American, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
old stock, like pre-1900. Yeah, American. Yeah.
Yeah, which is that's today that's because like a lot of these people are like you have to go back, and I'm like, your last name is Italian. I mean, it's like, okay, so that's fine, but like you understand that like you are the original, you have to go back, so it's like so if you're here, it used to be like if you're here after the Civil War, you were whatever, you were like, immigrant ethnic American, but now it's not like that. But anyway, so just all joking aside, people flip their shit over like, these high skilled immigrants and stuff like that. There's issues, I think, with the execution of the program with H-1Bs and frauds. Like that's a real issue. But the reality is, like, even if there's fraud in the H-1Bs, these are still not semi-literate. They're not low, whatever their skill level is, and even if it's not as high, because some of them is pretty high. Like, I had a friend who worked for Uber, and he was making $600,000 a year when he was an H-1B. Okay, this is not someone that's like coming into a chop, some chop shop or whatever they call it, just like some low skill replacement. I mean, he's a person with serious skills. He is actually an immigrant now. Almost, I think he'll be a citizen in like a couple. He's got one more year. But anyway, he's I'm not gonna like. I don't know how this doxing thing works. And anyway, he's not a public person, but he went through Y Combinator, is successful. Like, this is exactly the type of person you want to be an American, et cetera, et cetera. He just happened to have a British passport, even though he was mostly educated abroad, in UK and US. But my point here is now the right, broadly construed, a lot of them are worried about high skilled immigration. Is this online or like what do you hear in DC? Because like Trump has been very like ambivalent or ambiguous about this, where he seems to go back and forth. Although some of the people, like Stephen Miller, for example, I think he wants everyone to go back
Yes.
who came after 1800, except for maybe his family.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've always like during the first Trump administration, I thought he was much more anti-skilled immigration than they said. So you take a look at like the policies they supported, like the RAISE Act, which was introduced by Senator Cotton in Purdue. And that bill would have, reduced family immigration a lot to the United States, reduced diversity, green cards, etc., and put more limitations on refugees and asylum. And they sold it as this bill that would like do a ton for high skilled immigration. It kept those numbers the same and actually reduced the H-1Bs in there. So it actually reduced high skilled immigration as well to here. So I haven't really seen this pro skilled thing. Like rhetorically, they pulled it out every once in a while, but it's like a bait and switch. It's saying like, oh, Canada does skilled immigration so much better than we do. We should copy Canada. Here's this bill that cuts legal immigration. Even for high skilled people. So it's sort of like this political bait and switch thing. But I have noticed it has gotten much louder. And I think the turning point was actually around the time that Trump got elected, because there were some scandals with like Disney hiring some people on H-1Bs and firing some native born Americans like at the same time in the same exact professions. And there was some evidence that some of the native born Americans had to train some of their like replacement workers at Disney. And so I think it's like flipped a long time before then. But now it's just like part and parcel of this. Like I retweeted some guy this morning. We're recording this on July 23rd. Who's like an Indian immigrant to the US. And he's like baffled and thinks it's actually the clearest evidence that a lot of people who are in the Trump orbit or animated by this are partly motivated by like racial animus more so than he ever thought, because he's like, there's no argument against high skilled immigration that is, consistent with this. Like they're not crime producing population, very little terrorism, almost none, high incomes, high taxes. The H-1B population like has wages on average above the 90th percentile of American workers. I mean, it's just like a great population of people who do wonderful in the United States. And there's an enormous amount of like Indian hate. And I focus on the Indians because they're a majority of people who get the H-1Bs. In there. And if you lump in like other South Asians, you're talking like about a super majority of this people, and like a great population of people. They make wonderful Americans. Their kids do super well. They start a bunch of companies. On paper, they have like the same education levels like East Asians, but they do substantially better in the US. There's a funny like National Academy of Sciences paper on this that looked into it, and it basically came down to like them saying in really funny academic jargon, it's just because South Asians are like pushier and more American. Like in terms of like, they just like know what they want and they push for it and they're not afraid to ask, right? So it's like these cultural things. So like I've noticed like a huge shift where like right wingers are much more in like the Mark Krikorian camp and the Stephen Miller camp, where they're like, yeah, all immigration is like really bad and we really shouldn't have much of anything of it, except for maybe some like people who are like married to Americans or like their minor children, and the occasional handful of like really, really geniuses who already won like Nobel Prizes. And so that's like a big shift. I don't know how deep it is, or if it's just like to try to be consistent with the rhetoric online. It's like, you probably saw that horrible video where it was like Mehdi Hassan debating like these like 20 right wingers, right? And some of the things some of these right wingers said were like, I thought like pretty outrageous, but I wonder how much of this is just like actual beliefs or just trying to like outbase the other right wingers online, or if they're like actually really, really strongly held beliefs, right? Like, I mean, what do you think?
Yeah.
Like, is it an ideological shift, or is it just like trying to signal that you're on Team Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really. I think that has always been there, actually, as like it's like a normal human reflex, kind of. I think that sort of thing, and I think it was suppressed. I mean, so for example, I don't think the Romney, and like Romney was into self deportation. I don't want to make it seem like he was a softie and a squishy. He wasn't, actually. In some ways, he was less squishy than Trump. Ironically, even though he spoke in a more shall we say articulate manner, but you know that the Romney Party would not tolerate hate on high-skilled immigration because of its like economic philosophy, right? And so, but I think the masses have always been much more skeptical because, like, what do they care? And I mean, like some of the stuff, like you said, like okay, the H-1Bs at the 90th percentile. A lot of people are like, oh, these H-1Bs are retarded and they can't do anything, and we could just like get like these white programmers from Iowa, and I'm just like, okay, I mean, you're just asserting things. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's just like, okay, I don't think that that's
Yeah.
true. I mean,
Yeah,
like basically, if they're,
labor markets are complicated, but there's no substitution between somebody who has a high school degree and drives a truck and somebody who has a graduate degree and toxicology and pharmacology who designs drugs. Like there's no substitution there.
well, I mean, so Norman Matloff. I don't know if you know him, computer science emeritus. Okay, so he would say like, oh, you could just like have a high school person do programming, do software engineering. It's not that hard. And I just always thought, because as listeners know, as I'm interested in psychometrics. All of a sudden, all this stuff about like IQ and just goes out the window. Like, oh, like anyone can do this stuff. So I'm just like, it's kind of like one of these issues. Yeah,
I almost wonder if he's like never met somebody who's not a high school dropout.
yeah.
Does he ever, meet them?
This is a serious problem with older professors. Like, there's many stories I can tell you where they don't know what normal people are like anymore because one, they hate undergrad students. They don't teach a lot of their own courses, and the interaction with the plebes that they have are graduate students.
Yeah, I mean, I had. Yeah, it's really sad. I remember, like, when I was a kid, I listened to some conservative talk radio, and I remember like this sort of experience of becoming like disagreeing with Thomas Sowell, coming to this point where like I agree with Thomas Sowell, like, oh yeah, intellectuals, they're all wrong about everything all the time, yada yada yada. And I was listening to Larry Elder's show on talk radio in Southern California, and this lady calls in and is like, we need to get the government off our back. And Larry's like, yeah. And then she's like, we need to deregulate the economy and cut taxes. And Larry was like, yeah. And then she goes, and we need to make sure that the government prints lots of money to make us all millionaires. And I'm like, I think and that's like a very like populist, like, you talk to like a normal person or maybe like a subpar person, right? And you say that they say this type of stuff like all the time. And like, you just parse it and you just have to talk to them to realize that, like, you have a conversation with the guy and like, maybe I'm sounding like an elitist jerk, like on the East Coast, but just like talk to some of these people.
Well, I mean,
and you have ideas that are insane. Like they're just insane.
But you are kind of an elitist jerk. I mean, you're a nice guy, but like you got sharp elbows, and you definitely are an elitist. So let's not like
Well,
I could be like,
but I don't want to sound like it, Razib. I want to sound like a cuddly. I respect these institutions that give people who have really insane opinions just as much political say as I do. I want to pretend like to respect that.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people are just kind of retarded. Most people are. I mean, I think we know that. I mean, I would have like a much bigger Substack following if my content, like, was geared towards being stupid. Because stupid is like, that's a big market. People think that you can print money and that's how you get rich instead of, rich is actually productivity. It's like, it's like, okay, I don't want to get into like how stupid people are because like people are stupid. But I do wonder about this because like I do think it is respectable or it is like intellectually coherent to say we want kind of like a white ethno state or have a pause in immigration and assimilate these people. But there is a tendency where so like the DSA, Democratic Socialist type people, okay? So for example, I am okay, I'm not a big fan of higher marginal taxes as such, but it doesn't like distort the market principle as much as, like really, really crappy regulation that you can't fire people. Okay. So there's different types of regulation in socialism where it triggers me differently. So if it doesn't interfere with the price function and the broader workings of the market, I'm like less triggered by it. But then like, Zoran Mamdani's grocery store, stuff like really, really pissed me off because I'm like, no, we do not nationalize things unless you really need, like maybe the military, you just do not do that. There's reasons, okay? So, whatever. I think like on the right, one thing that I have noticed is, they're kind of being like stupid and retarded, to be candid, where it's like, if we just like stop all immigration, everything will be good. Like housing will go down, our economy will be great, everyone will have jobs, the streets will be clean, and like I will have a 10 white because all the immigrants are taking my hot women.
Yeah,
I mean, Yeah,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
the thing that the the Mamdanis of the world and the sort of nativists, nationalists, whatever you want to call them, of the world have in common is they have a very hard zero sum mentality of wealth, of productivity, of standard of living, of the distribution of beautiful women, as you said. And so the idea is like, well, if somebody is married to somebody else or has a job, then that means somebody else loses. So I think it's very much like that. And you see that in the international politics expressed by the Trump administration. You see it in trade, I think, very clearly. You see it in immigration. You see it in a large number of the policies that both Mamdani and Donald Trump supports, right? And if you dig into like a lot of the policy platforms that people who are on this like, DSA socialist left, right? They'll say pro-immigration stuff, but then they say like, oh, but you can't come if you are, paid below like a $25 minimum wage, right? Which would be like a hyper restrictive immigration policy that they just don't think of on this because they're frankly like very, very dim economic thinkers. And like a lot of people who have this zero sum mentality are just frankly not very good at thinking like economists in a system where we still have some private properties and free markets and prices are allowed to work fine most of the time.
Well, I
That's the
mean,
threat.
yeah, and I know that some of the listeners are going to be like, I'm gonna be having some comments here because they'll be like, you people need to go back, and I'm still gonna subscribe to your Substack when you're living abroad, that sort of thing. But no, that is always the problem that I've had with some of these people because they're like, well, why are you like reading me if you don't need us? Like you
Well,
could
it's like
read
that
some,
old British. It's like that old British skit where it's like, now that we've got the recipe, do we really need to keep the immigrants around? Now that we've got the recipe, they're the wonderful food, right? So we've
yeah.
got, your recipe, right? And it's international markets. So you should go back to Bangladesh. I hear this type of crap like all the time. And I think that a lot of people don't understand is like if you lived, maybe not you specifically, but the average like productive like Bangladeshi American got deported or removed to Bangladesh, they would be a lot less productive. They would make many, many fewer things and the quality would probably be worse. And so like the world, they themselves, the immigrant and the world and the US would all be poorer as a result of this. In the same way that like if you passed a law that said like nobody can leave Detroit, and go all the way back to the 1960s, like the country would be a lot worse off because a lot of productive people who left Detroit went to other places and made goods and services. Meanwhile, like if they had been locked in that city, maybe that city would be a touch richer in some ways, but the whole world would be a lot worse off. And basically what we're doing with our immigration policy is it's the equivalent of locking an enormous number of productive people in the global equivalent of Detroit.
Okay. Well, I mean, so I actually have some exchanges about this. I do think NIMBYism and YIMBYism and immigration, it kind of brings together people from the left and the right. So, I've had this experience in Austin, much more much more when I first moved here in the teens, less now, but of, local Austin people, usually very left wing, they're like, well, I mean, you guys have like really changed things. And, my family's been here, it was like Mexican American. This is actually a real person I'm thinking about now. The first person who was actually Mexican American is like, my mom's family's been in Central Texas, since like the 1830s or whatever. And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, who'd they take the land from?
Yeah.
You know? And they didn't really enjoy that conversation. But it's like, look, the reality, and I just had an exchange with some retard. I'm going to call him a retard because he was kind of dumb. Ryan Lynch. I'm going to name him. If you want to check it out. I guess
Oh,
he lives here.
I responded to him.
Yeah, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I later had to conclude. I had to like mute it because I was like, I think this guy is just stupid. Because like, he was saying like, we killed the Comanches. And I'm like, yeah. And like, you have the right to this land the same as the Comanches. And he's like, well, are you threatening me? And I'm like, no, but you just said you killed some people to take the land. Like, what kind of like precedent have you established as having a right to the land?
And he said that in the same breath as saying you have to go back. So like, it's a pretty like clear, it's not like a legally actionable threat, but like the implication is pretty clear.
Well, he also, exactly. When I say that, the issue is like, I don't really mind so much when people say I have to go back because like, I mean, I didn't grow up in Bangladesh, but I could probably get Bangladesh citizenship or something, whatever, you know? But when people say that my kids have to go back, I do just tell them I'm going to shoot you in the head if you try to, you know. I mean, it's just like you're basically saying that you want to kill my children, you know, like that's basically what you're saying because they have nowhere to go, you know. And so, but they're like, "Wait, you're violent, like you're a bad person." I'm just like, no, you're talking about expelling people who were born in this country who like have never been anywhere else, whose blood or like whose lineage also extends in this country. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, are you stupid? You just think this is an internet meme? You know?
Yeah, how do they think deportations work? Like you send them
I
like you send them like a card in the mail, and they're like, "Oh well, gotta go." Like,
well, you know, these people are LARPing, they're being performative, and you know, so I mean, this stuff is real. But I will say, like, I do make a distinction here. So you know, in biology, you have different taxonomical levels. So you have like, you know, the kingdom, and you have the phylum, and all this stuff. And the reality is, like, you know, this is like I think what in like software, like some of the old software books that I read, they call it semantic sugar. It's like, okay, it's just kind of like it's not, it's like, it's just for human reference. They're not real things. Species is the only thing, especially with mammals, where it's kind of a real thing because of like, you know, reproductive barriers. Although even this is like way fuzzier than normies, like normal people that are not biologists think. Setting that aside, species are a real thing. Subspecies, races, again, they're like semantic sugar, okay? My point here is, to make an analogy is, I think like a national border is a real thing. A nation state is a real thing. But you know, when people are saying, so this Ryan Lynch guy who I'm naming, is like, you know, my family's been in Austin, I guess since they killed the Comanches or whatever. And uh, you know, Austin was better back in the. It was like, okay, but you live in the United fucking States, okay? There's no immigration restrictions on going from state to city to city to city. And this is like a left right like combined way of thinking. It's like, you know, the city was like this, and like you newcomers are here, and you've changed it. Well, no shit. We live in the United States. There's free trade and there's free movement. It's been like that since the fucking beginning, and it's been like that since your ancestors founded it to be like that. You know, like this is actually your legacy. This is your heritage. And now you want it to change because you liked it the way it was when you grew up there, which is fine. That's a normal human instinct. But to make it into your political philosophy, in my opinion, is kind of obnoxious because that is not the American way. And also, like, I live in Austin, Texas. Like, its population has doubled in 40 years. I mean, you have family from this area. You know how it is.
yeah.
And, we don't fucking live in Mayberry. Like, where the fuck do you think you grew up? You live in a large city. It's always been like this everywhere in the history of human civilization.
So I think what we're also seeing here is a large number of American right-wingers who are LARPing as European nationalists, where in Europe you really do have a sense, in a lot of those countries, that it's, it's an ethnic identity. What it means to be Danish is you're descended from this tribe and this ethnic thing. And like, it's, a lot of it is real, a lot of it is imagined, whatever. But that is like the foundation of those states. Whereas the United States is not a nation state in that way, right? Like we're a state, we're a country, we have a lot of stuff, but we're not a nation state in that we're founded for a specific ethnicity. And that's it. That wouldn't have made sense even at the founding. It certainly makes a lot less sense now. And that's just like a different way of organizing a government. And only about 20% of countries in the world can be fairly described as nation states, and that there's sort of an ethnic basis that is at the core of what it means to be a member of that state, and they're mostly like a lot of Asian European countries, right? But not the United States, not Canada, not a lot of Western Hemisphere countries. And other countries around the world where that's just like ludicrous. And so I think what you have is a lot of these American right-wingers who see these like European right-wingers who say like this insane stuff from our ears about, ethnic homogeneity and going back to the way it was when everybody was like the descendant of some like crappy European Germanic tribe from like 2,000 years ago. And they sort of like LARP that and miss that. And part of it is just like the poverty of the modern American English language, where we assume the word nation and country are synonyms, where they're really like not. They do mean different things. And like all the Europeans I know like understand that they mean different things. That's why they use those words differently when they come over. But Americans don't get that. And so it's like a very annoying, very frustrating thing. But I also think that a lot of the a lot of the stuff that's like is either skin deep. It's not really that important. I don't mean that as a pun, but like it's not that important to their worldview. And I don't really think they actually believe it, and they actually haven't really thought about it. It's just like a troll game. They're trying to troll Razib and to making him pissed off. And you've got a good sense of humor, so you don't do it. You don't take the bait.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is just kind of ludicrous because, my attitude, I have to say, is like, and like, I disagree with JD, I think, on this, in terms of, JD Vance, the small town America and all that. Like, I've lived in smaller towns. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Eastern Oregon, in La Grande, Oregon. For those of you, I mean, some of you listeners know, it's in my Wikipedia, I mean, that was a Ryan Lynch exchange where he was like, "Who the hell are you?" And I'm like, motherfucker, like, I have a Wikipedia entry. If you ask ChatGPT, it'll tell you who I am. Like, you don't need to, like, you follow me on Twitter. I don't follow you. Like, what the hell's going on? Then later he was like, I don't care who you are. I'm like, well, just ask who I am. It's just, again, like, I think it was an IQ issue. I thought maybe it was just like an ideological difference, but it's an IQ issue. But anyway,
well, that's endogenous. That's endogenous.
Yeah, exactly. Like, those of you who know what that means. But so I want to say though, small towns, like, they have their charms, and I grew up in a small town. But people, they leave small towns of a certain kind, a certain kind of people, like people like that want to make like the next great, company, people that want to, a lot of times, like, not all, I mean, obviously university towns are a whole thing in themselves, but like really big R1 universities tend to be in and around, like Ann Arbor is not Detroit, but it's close to Detroit and Flint. I'm just saying, like, R1 universities, sorts of things. Also, to be candid, you go to a place like New York and LA, and you're seeing some like fine ladies, like the really, really hot women are not working at Applebee's in Western Nebraska. Just putting it out there. Okay.
Another way to put it that's nicer, if you don't mind, is that in bigger cities, you have more people and therefore greater division of labor. And you're just going to have more amenities of every kind and variety.
I mean, agglomeration effects are real. So I'm actually like pro big city in a lot of ways now. I think that allows us to compete. We need more Shenzhens. I'm not like against like small towns, but I think the future of small towns, to be entirely candid, it's going to be a lot of older people that are retired, in terms of like, they don't want to live in a big city townhome or condominium complex. They just want to live in like some, there's like a little bit more like, well, I mean, Asheville is getting too big, but there are some small towns in America that like upper middle class retirees go to. Those are nice. There are a lot of small towns, and most of them, the upper middle class retirees do not go to, and they have a lot of people who are left behind, so to speak. And, and like the retired people there had never gone anywhere else. And so that's bad. We don't need that. But my point here is, we are a big country, and this idea that, I want Austin to stay the way it was in 1990, it's just, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to start, because that's never been like that. It's never even been like that. Ever.
It's
in the history of the world when it comes to cities. Yeah.
It's a real loser's mentality in my perspective, right? They want to treat cities, urban environments, as museums. While these are places where people live, they need to change because people change. The economy changes, society changes. So they need to adapt and change like that. I mean, one of the worst things that could happen to the US is what's happened to Europe over the last 70, 80 years, right? Is you just freeze these cities that are admittedly beautiful, right? You got like the wonderful architecture, stuff that's like older than, the discovery of North America by Europeans, right? Like just like incredible things walking around. But the cost of that is a much less dynamic country, a much less dynamic society, much less dynamic culture. And as a result of that, you're just kind of like, in stasis. And a lot of the people who are energetic, they go to the places in Europe that are most, least like that. They go to a place like London, or they go to the United States or Canada or Australia, these places where we just have less ties. So like one of the worst things that could happen to the US, in my opinion, is that like we freeze these cities the way they are. And frankly, American cities aren't that pretty anyway, right? So we freeze these cities the way they are. And then we lower economic growth and dynamism and everything else here. So we're stuck with like the worst of both worlds, right? Like European economic growth with like American city aesthetics. My God, could you imagine like a worse place?
Well, to be fair, San Francisco is quite a lot of the city is quite beautiful, actually. And there are certain areas, like like Capitol Hill, Queen Anne in Seattle. I mean, Austin is not one of those. Austin
So
is like, yeah.
Yeah, but like compare it to like, a European city, right? Like say like you
Yeah.
transported San Francisco over to Europe, like would it be in the top 10 of like
No,
pretty places? Like no way. No way.
no,
Not
no,
even
no, no, no.
close. Not
But,
top 20.
what I would say is like, in terms of, and like obviously there have been people who've like followed me on the, and like literally one time last year I went to New York City and I ran into a guy who had been reading my blog since 2002 when he was, had just graduated college. And now we're in our 40s and, so it's like with children. So it's like he saw the whole arc. There are people who like see me through the whole arc. I was much more open to, immigration restrictionist arguments like 25 years ago. And like people have like heard me say this. A lot of it just had to do with the total fertility rate in terms of like this idea that, like teenagers can go, work on the yard. We don't have the total fertility rate no more. First of all, a lot of the people, I mean, and it's like, oh, well, because the immigrants are decreasing fertility, which is like, okay, I think that's kind of, I mean, I've seen some social science that supports that, but I think that's kind of retarded because the reality is I've also seen arguments that diversity increases fertility rate through competition. So it's one of those things where, okay, like the cause works both ways, right? Like, it's like obviously there's some issue with the causality they don't understand. Or like, Israel, which is actually a very diverse state, has a high fertility as well, So anyway, just setting that aside, I think the issue with the United States right now is I think we need to like make a decision what we want to be. And like, yes, like, and I have friends, like Jonathan Keeperman, Lomez was on this podcast. We're friends. I would say Jonathan, he wants immigration to be stopped or paused de facto. And, Jason Richwhine, who was on I'm going to post his podcast before yours, recorded this last week. So just, breaking the fourth wall or whatever, his idea is like an immigration pause is really just going to be like net zero. People are going to be coming in, people are going to be leaving. So it's not like people aren't going to be moving, but that idea of America, it will be stable. But I think that means that we're kind of out of the game, to be candid. Yeah, in terms of like dynamism and like, world leadership, because, the best people, like a lot of them will still come. But there are, like I said, I know people in artificial intelligence who are not coming to this country because they don't want to deal with the hassle, because like we're not
Yes.
treating those people the way they used to be. I mean, these are real people. I'm not joking. I'm not like being abstract. These are real people I know. And they're just like, maybe I'll just go to a third world country like the UK. Yes, a real person,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think one of the things that does make the US, and I'm like this old school patriotic, like America is an exceptional country because it really is in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that has helped us be exceptional, it's not the only reason, but is our relative openness to immigrants, to foreigners, to letting these people come here and do what they do best, which is make their lives better. And by doing that, incidentally, making this a much more dynamic place. Like I think like if you go with that Jason Richwhine type of policy, right, of like net zero in terms of that, what you're really doing is a degrowth. It's like conservative degrowtherism. Like you really are going to shrink the United States because the fertility rates are so low that without immigration, the CBO estimates that in the late 2030s or mid 2040s, we will have a literal population decline beginning in the United States, and the country will get substantially older. And what we know about older societies is they're not as dynamic because older people aren't as dynamic, right? So I think, and there's something like really special about people who decide to move from a country where they have to like, get rid of their culture that they grew up with, basically, or like shove it aside substantially, learn a new language to come here and get a job or start a business or just live in a land of freedom. Those are just like different people than the people they leave behind. There are selection effects, self-selection effects that are really big on that. And so, I just want to ask like a lot of these people like, well, when in the past should we have like stopped it? Like if you stopped immigration in 1800, there'd be fewer than 100 million people here today, according to estimates, assuming that fertility didn't change and whatever, right? And I just don't think there's any world where the U.S. would be a richer, freer, more dynamic, more interesting place if there are fewer than 100 million of us like here today. Yeah, sure. I guess maybe we'd be like more pure in some like old-fashioned like European nationalist sense of the word, but I don't really care about that. And I think that one of the benefits, so like one of the costs of dynamism is you're just going to be a little different. You're going to change. change is part of dynamism, and I want the United States to continue to be like top dog, frankly.
Yeah, so we've been talking for like a little over an hour, so I'll let you go soon. But I do want to ask you this. The usual retort, I think, is that immigration pause, de facto immigration pause, sort of after 1924, between 1924 and about 1965, there wasn't that much immigration. I mean, okay, the Great Depression has happened, World War II happened, so I wonder if we did have peace in our time, so to speak, if it would have been a little different. And then you had the baby boom after World War II, so there were some reasons, I think, why, we were dynamic, actually. Well, I mean, there was nobody else after World War II, really. I mean, Soviet Union was not real competition. It was.
Yeah, I mean,
so can you talk about that immigration pause and, why that doesn't falsify your thesis?
So there's a lot of evidence. If you take a look at like Italian immigrants who came in 1890, 35 years before the pause took effect, and you see their sort of like rate of integration and assimilation, and then their kids, et cetera, and carry that out. The rate of change for them was no different than the rate of change of an Italian who came right before the borders were closed. So there's really not much good evidence that the rate of assimilation for the people who are here changed. Now, what obviously did happen is that you had a change in the composition of people who are here, right? So from the perspective of people who were here, it did seem like assimilation had increased because you just have fewer people being added in. But we didn't see any change in the rates of assimilation for those people who had. So what we really missed out on from that period of time that was where immigration was paused from the early 20s to the late 1960s is we missed out on tens of millions of mainly European immigrants, disproportionately Jewish and Southern and Eastern European, who would have come here, not been killed in World War II, and who would have assimilated just as well as the immigrants who came 10 or 20 years before the pause in immigration took effect. Now, in terms of like the baby boom stuff, what we see is like that was generally a global phenomenon, even in countries that didn't restrict immigration that much, like Canada. So I think there's like an exogenous factor that explains that. And there's a lot of social science research that tries to explain this. But the thing that I've learned, because I've been digging into a lot of social science on demographics and fertility, is like they just don't understand a lot of what happened with fertility, basically at all. And there's a lot of different competing theories, and they all sound pretty good. But this was like a totally unexpected fertility bump that happened basically everywhere in the world from the late 1930s to like the mid 1960s, and then it turned off or started to go downward, right? So I don't think that it's plausible to claim that immigration restrictions caused that, because the timing doesn't work anyway, and it was a global phenomenon, even in countries that didn't pause immigration.
Right, that was a very good response. Final question. How are you feeling about immigration and migration going forward? Like we got another year. Is it a year and a half? No, it's a year probably until highly likely that the Democrats win the House, that no legislation is happening, and we have a foreign policy executive order only president. And there's going to be another impeachment probably, and a lot of investigations. So, like, how are you feeling about immigration going forward? I don't know. In this country.
Pretty bad. Last time we talked in 2022, you asked me a similar question. I said I feel terrible about it because I think the other side basically won. If you don't believe me, go back and listen to it. But I feel about the same way right now. I think the chaos that we experienced during the Biden administration was a real killer in terms of public opinion on this stuff. I know like some of the polls show that it's going in the opposite direction, but that's just like thermostatic. I don't think we're actually going to go in the opposite direction if a Democrat even wins in 2028 that much. I think you're going to see a lot more border control and an emphasis on security rather than liberalization that takes over basically both parties going forward, at least on the national level. I think Congress is pretty much a dying institution and largely irrelevant when it comes to most policymaking in the United States. So I don't think we'll see that much change. We may see some like impeachment, but impeachment is like a dead letter basically in the Constitution. It's never really worked. I mean, I find it like implausible that you have 47 different presidents and not one of them was removed for incompetence. So like clearly like something's broken in how the Constitution works in that regard. So I don't think Congress matters that much. I think that will probably just be a mood switch and that you'll see a lot of people be against President Trump. But I don't think they'll be against Trump largely because of immigration issues. I think they'll probably be against Trump due to like perception of chaos, perceptions of corruption. Maybe the economy will be a little bit worse in that sense, just because of like, recessions happen. And there'll be like this perception of like, hey, we've got this really old guy who's president who seems to be like off his rocker and was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. So type of stuff. Like, and politics is just like crazy and weird and totally baffling to me in the US, right? So I don't want to attribute everything that happens to immigration in there. So but to put it bluntly, I'm pretty darn pessimistic about immigration policy and politics for the near future.
All right. With that, you know what? The truth is what it is, and so like I appreciate that you actually just like told us what you thought. And I think actually, some people are some of my listeners are gonna be quite happy about your answer in a way.
Well, they should know that like I don't sugarcoat things and I don't publish things I don't believe in and I don't say things I don't believe in. So if with that knowledge in mind, they should read my writings with more confidence in my perspective.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Alex. Maybe maybe we'll be talking in another 3 years, and we'll see where we are. In another 3 years, we'll probably have another president, maybe. So, we should.
Well, the election will not have happened yet.
Okay, but soon. Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
We will know whether it's President Vance or President Newsom. I don't know. Just probably not.
Yeah,
We'll see.
whoever knows, who knows what the next Democratic.
We're old enough. We're old enough to know that you usually cannot predict. Although I guess like recently there has been like, Biden. I don't think that you predicted that he would win, but you knew he would run. And definitely Hillary in 2016 was just that the fix was in there. Romney in 2012, the fix was in there. So it's been quite stable. When we were younger, I feel like it was much more volatile in terms of what was going to happen with the primary system.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really trust my perspective pre-Trump. I think that there were a lot of problems, sort of political, institutional governance problems underneath the surface that were just sort of swept aside by norms. And we're seeing sort of the full flowering of the failure of American institutions when it comes to the presidency and executive power that was always there beneath the surface, but is just like much more in our face and oftentimes more extreme now. But it was always there. Cult of the presidency has reached its apotheosis.
All right. With that, I will sign off, and I will see you online.
See you online. Thanks, Razib.
This podcast for kids